Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. This is our regular series. We talk about making music, talk about composing, arranging, improvising, playing by ear, all the creative aspects of music making. And as has been the case lately and will be going forward a bit, we're looking at counterpoint in conjunction with my Practical Counterpoint course. So I've got a bunch of examples kind of queued up. People have been doing the species counterpoint exercises, and we're just going to kind of go over those. I've already been giving comments on a bunch of people's exercises in the community, and we'll continue to do that. But I'm just going to take some selected ones to look at a little bit of first species, a little bit of second, a little bit of third, a little bit of fourth today. And by all means, as always, questions about the material, happy to answer. So let's go ahead and dive in with some examples here. So let me grab my page over here, and actually I need to not have that there because that's going to cover up my bookmarks. So I'm going to look at my bookmarks. How about I'm going to put this over here for the moment. And so yeah, I've got a bunch of posts that people have made, different species and so forth. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump into a couple specific places and take a look at some specific things here. So we're going to look at one here. And I want to make sure I get at least one of each species that we're looking at and then come back for others. So these are some of the ones we're going to take a look at here. And so this one here that I'm going to look at is Duald, and I always apologize for having no idea how to pronounce names sometimes. And as I recall, he posted his by attaching it, and I'm going to also load it up into MuseScore because I had saved it there. So here is his first species counterpoint here. And the comment that I had made about it, apparently there was like a typo in the beginning, and so I'll comment about that, and then we'll just take a look at the rest of some of what's going on in this first species exercise here. So looks like my system is being unusually slow, but hopefully will still behave. All right. So the apparent typo here was that this first note was never meant to be a G. It was meant to be an A, and some sort of finger slip somewhere along the lines. We now know that that was meant to be an A. So I'm going to go with an A on this one, and we're going to listen to this first example and then just talk through it a little bit, and then I might skip over and do another one here. So let's go ahead and listen to Duald's first example here. Oops. Let me make sure I start with both staves. Here we go. All right, so that is the first exercise there, the Dorian example there. And I want to comment about a few things about it. And some of these I had made, also commented in my comments there. But I want to talk about a couple, make sure that people saw this because there's a couple of really interesting things here. One is the fact that we're starting right off with that series of leaps. I mean, that's a dramatic start. 2 big leaps like that. But it's kind of cool, right? I rather like it. And then it comes down with another leap, and all of these leaps outline a triad, right? We have a fourth and then a fifth and then a third, and they basically form a D minor triad. Again, if you talk to people in the Renaissance, if that were possible, they wouldn't have used the word triad to describe what was happening. They would just talk about the internal intervals and the fact that there were no dissonances formed by any 2 adjacent notes within the links or even non-adjacent notes, right? There's no dissonances other than that fourth. And so there would be all these like special rules for saying how to how to describe what the rule would be. But in my piano is on the soft side. I agree. I don't know why it seems softer than usual. But hopefully that's a little better. So the yeah, if we can just say, if your melody leaps form a triad, you're in pretty good shape. So that's something. The other thing that I commented on that I thought was really, I don't know, an interesting feature. When he posted this, he specifically mentioned that there was a fourth, and he was referring to this fourth, the E to A fourth in the third bar. So let me play this. I think to modern ears, I'm going to, generalize from myself, to modern ears, nothing about that fourth sounds even remotely dissonant. Would you agree? I don't hear dissonance there, which really helps emphasize the context dependency of the fourth and why sometimes it's considered dissonance and sometimes it's not. But I want to unpack a little bit about what's going on here. Again, we can't pretend the last 4 centuries haven't happened. So we're allowed to look at this through 21st century eyes or ears. This is basically all D minor triad, right? If we think of this in harmonic senses, we have a D minor and then a D minor in first version. Okay, so you all are, let me listen through my other headphones. Hold on. That's my usual. Seems like my usual sound to me, so it could be something going on, again, internet connection wise, and different internet connections are processing the sound differently. All right, so we have a D minor triad basically in these first couple measures. And then, the F in the bass makes this first inversion. If I just look at these 3 bars here, I'll tell you what I hear harmonically. I hear that. I hear D minor in first inversion. I hear A in second inversion, and then D minor in root position. This chord here, the A chord in second inversion, is what is called a passing 6/4 chord. Those of you who took the harmony course a few months ago, or if you've studied harmony at all, you know that there's different ways we classify second inversion chords. And so this type of sound has a fourth on the bottom of it, but it's considered just fine. It's considered fine. I'm going to try one thing, since a couple people are still talking about the quietness of the piano. I'm going to try one other thing here, and maybe this will make a positive difference, or maybe it won't. Let me know if that's better or worse. And we'll go from there. So this sound here is actually very commonplace. So that passing 6/4 chord, even though we don't see a C sharp here, but this is what my ear is filling in. It is filling in a context in which that perfect fourth on the bottom actually worked pretty well. And so when we talk about fourths being dissonant, kind of unstable is the term that I like to use, because it's really not inherently dissonant. It's that there's some contexts in which they kind of make sense, and that's one of them, this passing 6/4 sound. So that's really what's going on here in our ears. Can you imagine that being the melody? Right? That would be a totally lovely little bit of melody in a Baroque context or a classical context or anything like that. So sometimes the ear is going to fill in contexts like that. So that was something that I thought was worth spending some time talking about, because yes, I definitely want people to be aware that these are not like arbitrary rules that say thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do that. It's more, if you do this, you'll create this sound, and you have to decide if that sound is what you want. And that sound of that passing 6/4 chord is actually a fine sound. So now that we have that context, I'm getting too loud. Push my mic a little further away. Now that now that we have a little context for the ear, that fourth can be a little more acceptable. So that was my observation about that one that I wanted to talk about a little bit more. I'm going to go to another example of his here just to talk about a case where this is the counterpoint being added below the cantus firmus. So here's the version with F, which I would say is Lydian, but as soon as you add B flats to all your Bs, it doesn't sound like Lydian, it sounds like F major, right? So, and that's what we actually called for in the exercise. So let's do this. I'm just going to play it myself to play at my tempo. So this is probably the most melodic of the cantus firmi, right? That's a nice little melody. It sounds like a little nursery rhyme. And is there a note missing in there? I'm looking at the other version. Well, that's what he has for both of them. So I'll assume that's correct. I don't remember. But it's a very nice melody, and it's one of the ones that when people harmonize this, we got something that sounds even more like modern harmony, right? So this, again, is like a very common type of motion. 1, and then 5, 6, 5, and then 1, 1. I mean 5, 6 or 5, 6, 5. Right? It's a first inversion 5 chord. That is what our ear fills in. And so our ear really hears 1 chords, 4 chords, and 5 chords here. The one thing that I want to point out here is this motion here that a lot of people have done, and then we've talked about whether it's acceptable or not, and then we'll talk about why it might or not be and what you might do about it. So let's listen to starting here. Whoops. So we have this chord here, F against A, basically a first inversion F chord, and again I'm using modern terminology because we can. And then it's moving to what's basically a 5 chord, 1, right? So we hear 1, 5, 1, and that's all good. Harmonically it makes sense. But what's going on here, voice leading wise or counterpoint wise, is we are moving in similar motion to that 5th, right? And the question is, well, to what extent is that okay? Fuchs, in his book, talks about the reason to not do this, to not move in similar motion to a 5th. He talks about the fact that the ear fills in the following. Your ear fills in a B flat in that bottom voice. And then your ear hears the parallel 5ths. This is the standard explanation that has been given for centuries as to why we shouldn't have similar motion into a perfect 5th. I have to say, I've never fully bought into that argument. I don't know that my ear really fills in that B flat most of the time, and even if it did fill it in, I don't know that it would hear that parallel 5th as being problematic. That particular parallel 5th, I find, is probably my favorite parallel 5th ever. I mean, it's basically a root position 4 chord to a root position 5 chord, right? And that's such a common thing to have, is 4 going to 5, that particular set of parallel 5ths we're going to encounter a lot. You'll see a lot of composers not bother to disguise that. So to me, I don't hear a problem there. Right? But there's other contexts in which I did. I definitely commented about that on other people's, that, yeah, I kind of heard that direct 5th. Direct 5th is the term for the similar motion into the 5th. I kind of heard it. And so this is to me a perfect example of ask yourself the question, listen carefully. But the other thing that would happen here is, would there have been a better choice? Would you have liked something else better? Now, we're not going to mess with the cantus firmus, so that G we're stuck with. I would have loved it to be an E, right? That would have been lovely. It would have been lovely if the cantus firmus had gone down to an E, but it didn't. So the question is, should we have used an E in the bottom voice? Well, let me play it starting here with an E in the bottom voice. Now, I don't love that because of that motion from A down to that E. That felt like a big, kind of an awkward leap. I don't love that leap into the leading tone. It's not bad, but I don't love it. And so that's one of the things that I would also ask, well, what other options do I have? Again, if I had the luxury of changing the cantus firmus, I wouldn't have wanted an F here. I would have wanted an A there. And then I could have harmonized it that way. If this measure basically wasn't there at all, then starting from here, I could have had, and I would have loved it, right? So sometimes it's a question of seeing what you have to work with and finding ways of making it work. The other thing to be aware of is when you do have in your cantus firmus or your melody, harmonizing that first one with a D. So, yeah, I'm sorry that even with a restart, you're having problems with video. Apologize for whatever issues go on that cause that to happen. So sometimes you're a little bit locked into something by your cantus firmus, and the point that I've made before that I'm going to continue to make here is in real life, these situations come up most often because you're using imitative counterpoint, and your cantus firmus is really the imitation of something that happened before. And so if you want it to sound imitative, you really can't change the thing, from the first time to the second kind. And yet, what you'll often see is that people do that. They'll say, well, I'll mostly imitate, but I'll change one or two notes because otherwise things sound bad. And so just be aware that in real life, those little minor changes to the cantus firmus might be okay. All right? So, yeah, as far as first species go, I think many people have had a go at that, and I've said I think we are now seeing a lot of the same, things show up again and again, and so I hope that most first species questions are now kind of answered for people. I want to look at a second species example, and I'm going to look at Kevin Johnson's here, which is very well done, and I want to talk about one thing in specific here because yeah, I know my comments are already there and you can just read them, but I really feel like it's useful to hear the thing. So we're going to listen to a particular aspect of this example, which is how, I guess I got to view it on MuseScore.com to be able to zoom in. All right, well, it's as good as it's going to get here, so I'll just move it back over there. All right. It's weird that it won't let me zoom in more, but sometimes computers have a mind of their own, as we all know. I'm going to play through... Now I'm not seeing the thing that I thought I was supposed to be seeing here. Am I looking at the wrong one? Yeah, we'll just listen to it anyhow. I might have clicked the wrong link. Let me go back and find the leap to the seventh in bar 5. Leap to the seventh in bar 5. Is that there? Oh, yeah, it's there. Okay, sorry, I was just looking in the wrong bar. So here we go. All right, that is the piece. Lovely. I like it. I think it's a really good mix of second and third species counterpoint, right? So, here we go with the leap. He is leaping up to that seventh. right? And so when you read the guidelines for second species counterpoint, which is, of course, what that measure is, right? That measure is second species counterpoint. It's 2 against 1. Then what you normally hear is, well, don't do that, right? Don't leap into a dissonance. And yes, all things equal, you normally wouldn't want to leap into a dissonant interval. But again, our ears are going to do us a favor here and provide some context. Let me fill out this harmony a little bit more, starting in the previous bar. Right? This is E minor to the E minor 7. It's 3 leaping up to the 7th, and then the 7th resolves to the 3rd of the A minor chord to follow. The ear loves that kind of stuff. Leaping from the 3rd to the 7th of a chord, that is fine, right? That's a lovely thing. In general, arpeggiating a chord is, Bach does that kind of stuff all the time, either arpeggiating a chord fully like that and reaching the 7th after a small leap, or leaping directly from a root to a 7th or from a 3rd to a 7th. Those sorts of leaps up to the 7th of a chord and then letting it resolve in that natural way from the 7th of one chord to the 3rd of the next is extremely natural, right? And yes, Sora mentioned about the stepwise resolution, right as I was saying it, is when the chat came in. And yes, that's part of what makes it work. If it was just a leap, a random leap to a dissonant interval, we'd go, I don't know. But the fact that it was a leap to what is basically the 7th of that chord from another chord tone makes it sound like we're arpeggiating a chord, and then that 7th resolves the way our modern ears expect 7ths to resolve, by step down. So, and of course, not just modern ears. I mean, dissonance resolve down by step most of the time in any form of music anyhow. Occasionally up by step, but usually down by step. So by following, by just allowing yourself the leap to a dissonance, but otherwise still doing things sort of according to standard principles, right? We are still resolving that leap by step, and we are adding another condition. We're not saying we're going to leap to any dissonance, but maybe we'll leap to a dissonance if it allows the ear to fill in a chord. That is like one of the first breaking down of the barrier of whatever. When you have strict species counterpoint rules where Fuchs describes how Palestrina might have done it, this is where you realize this is how Bach and others of his generation came along and said, yeah, but I think this particular leap to a dissonance in this type of context will be fine. So anyhow, that was a comment about that particular exercise. I now want to jump to a fourth species one. So yeah, but everything else about this one is lovely, right? There's nothing else unusual. No, there's nothing else that I have to say, oh, well, this feels like he's breaking a rule, but it's okay because of blah, blah, blah. No, he's following the principles, and the principles work, right? When you have dissonances and resolve them by step, like he does here, it's fine. It sounds good to resolve dissonances by step. Now, here's a case where, if we think of it chordally, this interval of a seventh typically resolves downward or inward or something like that, but there's no rule that says it absolutely has to. And here's a case where the motion was going up. It makes perfect sense, especially given that the cantus firmus was going down, gives you contrary motion, right? So so this is just good writing. It's just good stuff. So I want to skip over to a fourth species one, so we get to look at each of these species in isolation a little bit. And again, I'm going to try to view this full screen, and I'm going to see if pulling it out. It's still so weird that it's not letting me zoom, but I'm just going to accept that. It's the way it is. Okay. So we have this example, and I'm going to play through this example as written. And I don't remember, let me see if she mentioned anything particular about, there's Brian's. She mentioned about counterpoint below, so I'll do that second. I'm going to do one of each. I'm going to do one with the counterpoint above, one with the counterpoint below. So we'll go ahead and look at, I'm going to look at the G version just for grins. All right, so we'll look at this version in G. All right. Really nice job, Shelley. So this is really, really well done. And so are other people having problems? That would be unfortunate if so. And if other people are not, please suggest to Paul that he first try just refreshing his browser screen. And if that doesn't work, log out, log in. Those are always going to be your two things to try. First, refresh browser screen, so F5 usually, or if that doesn't work, close the window, reopen it. Not even log out, just close the window and reopen it. Those are the things to try. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to de-offset this example, just so that we can tell, because the way I described it in like in the tip that I posted earlier this week, is that anytime we're doing these offsets, it's really as if you were playing the notes together. You're just not, right? So this G followed by that G, really we're following the same principle as if they were together. Same with this C against that A, or this B against that G. So I'm going to try to play it that way. That was an interesting little mental exercise for me to try to read it this way, but could you follow along what I was doing? I'll do it a little slower. G against G, C against A, B against G, G against B, I'm in the fourth measure, C against A in the fifth measure, E against G, D against F, G against E, E against C, C against A, D against B, B against G, A against F sharp, G against G. Well, that's all perfectly good first species counterpoint. And if it's going to be good first species counterpoint, you're in a good starting place for it to also be good fourth species counterpoint. So there's a couple noteworthy things about this. One is, okay, so the question has come up about those accidentals, right? The fact that in Mixolydian mode, which is what we call the mode that has a final of G, yes, we want to take that F and raise it to F sharp so that we have a leading tone in the cadence. And the question is, should we do it in other places? And my answer is, well, that's entirely up to you. The more you don't use F sharps elsewhere, you're going to keep a more pure Mixolydian mode feel, and it will feel a little more Renaissance-y. And the more you take that F and make it F sharp, even when you're not in an actual cadence, the more it's going to feel like the modern major scale. So I'm just going to play this passage. I'm just going to play the whole thing again up until that spot, but instead of an F, I'm going to use an F sharp when I get here. So. Right? So the F sharp sounds really nice because we hear the D against F sharp and it makes it sound like a 5 chord. However, when I do that, I didn't like the result as much here, right? I want to unpack why, because I'm having to think about this in real time, and you all can think about this too. So I have the A, E, G, D, F sharp. I really kind of wanted to hear that F sharp resolve up. That F sharp is a leading tone, and I really wanted to hear the 7 to 8 retardation. If you read the official rules about which what do you call it? Which suspensions are allowed for, depending on who's doing the writing. They will often say that yeah, that seventh, if it's been raised, should go up, and that's what I would say. We really hear this, right? Now, if this resolution is like a deceptive resolution, but there's something odd about then it being a leap in the bass. I might have liked it more if it was coming to an octave. Not that we have that choice. Then we'd have a 9/8 suspension, and maybe I would have liked it more. So as it is, the F natural really works better for me because it didn't need to go up. Not that she needed to go up. She had a choice of going up or down here. But if it went up, it would have sounded like a cadence. It would have sounded like we were done. And that's what she does at the end here with the F sharp up. So by using the F rather than F sharp, it allows us to create this sense that no, we're not done yet, and we're resolving things according to principles, and it hasn't like jumped out and said we are in the key of G major, because we don't necessarily want to say that, right? So when I talk about these accidentals being, well, you're going to use them at the cadences, but they're optional in other places, I don't mean they're optional like flip a coin. I mean they're optional like think about it. Is it going to do you any favors to do that, to add that accidental somewhere else? And if so, do it. The only one that I would say, and I think I did say, is when you're doing these ones in F, you're more likely than not going to want the B flat everywhere, because it's going to then allow you to avoid ugly tritones. So that's my general advice when you're doing the ones in F. You're probably going to almost always want that B flat. But if you find places where you don't, by all means, don't. So I uploaded that lesson a few days ago on the common suspensions, and it really talked about why 4-3 and 7-6 were the common suspensions. We get to see both of those here. Here's a 7-6 suspension. Man, it's so hard to start these pieces in the middle, but let me start here. G, leap to a consonance. Cantus firmus then creates a dissonance, which is a seventh, and then it resolves to a sixth. And now that's cantus firmus then moves to an E, which creates a fourth, and it comes down and becomes a third. Cantus firmus takes a step down and creates a fourth. Counterpoint steps down and creates a third also. So tritones are pretty, yes, but you will, and so yeah, when you have the opportunity to use them in a nice way, they can be really nice. But check this out. In the key of F, that tritone is really pulling you to C. So now you're creating a sense of a secondary dominant, right? If you're in the key of F, this tritone is pulling you to C. So it really makes it feel more like you're in C, or like you are at least tonicizing a C chord. It takes you outside the more modal framework, even though you think you're staying more modal by including a B. You're actually creating some modern harmony, some secondary dominance. So that's what I would say about that tritone. It's not as useful of a tritone if you're trying to do things that feel like you're focused on F. So it's not as useful as in the key of C, how that tritone is actually quite useful. All right, so now we're going to try that same example, but the upside down version, right, where the cantus firmus is on bottom and the counterpoint is below. All right, I hear some really good things happening in there, and then I heard a couple of things that I need to hear again to see if what's going on is at all what I think is going on. I'm going to go out on a limb and tell you what I think I heard. I'm pretty sure not looking at the music. Pretty sure I heard a fourth at the beginning in a context where, unlike that first example that I showed earlier, where I said, gee, this fourth makes perfect sense, I feel like I heard a fourth, and so I want to see if that's really true. And then I'm also thinking I heard parallel octaves somewhere, like around 2/3 of the way through. Parallel octaves or parallel fifths? I think it was octaves. Now we're going to see if my ears lied to me or not. So here's the beginning. Yeah, there is the leap to a fourth. Now, there's nothing wrong with leaps to fourth in fourth species counterpoint if they can then resolve by step. But that's not happening here. And so here's how you would have to play that. You'd have to go G, G, F, go down to it, C, and then resolve that fourth by step to an F, or take it up. And I didn't use examples in which we deliberately resolve suspensions upward, because in general, for these exercises, we want to get in the habit of doing the downward thing and know that upward resolutions are sometimes fine too, and that might have been one of them. So once you do one of these things where the cantus firmus moves and creates a dissonance, you are now compelled to resolve that dissonance by step. I mean, dissonances should pretty much always resolve by step. But in this case, and so here's the thing. Anyone doing this example would face the exact same situation. There is probably no other solution here. So I'm going to look up what Fuchs's solution was here. If you start with a G in Mixolydian mode, and now you want to put a counterpoint below it, as I've mentioned before, we're really limited to scale degrees 1 and 5, and when putting it on the bottom, it's really got to be scale degree 1. Otherwise, if you try putting scale degree 5 underneath it, you start right off with a fourth. If you try putting scale degree 4 below it, all right, that's fine, but now you're not starting on the 1 chord, to use modern terminology. So pretty much anyone doing this exercise is going to start with that G, and then be faced with that leap up to the fourth and have to solve that. So I don't know if Fuchs chose to tackle this, because I want to emphasize that these are the collection of all the exercises that Fuchs used, but he didn't go through every one of these exercises for every species. It was sort of different ones, and that this is like all of them collected into one place. So I don't know if he did a fourth species version of this one, but we're about to find out. But now that we have a dissonance, we either have to choose to go to that fourth or to come up to the A. I have, in that common suspensions lesson, I mentioned that this version, where we resolve the fourth to a fifth, is like, well, it's allowable, but it's not great, because we're going from one perfect consonance to another perfect consonance. And we started with a perfect consonant. It feels like, man, I'm ready for a third or a sixth between my voices, right? I'm ready for imperfect consonants, and I didn't get any yet. So that is a good reason why I think if it were me, I would have chosen to go up to the A doing it. But we're going to do a quick lookup. So here is how you can find Fuchs's things, and some of you have seen me do this before. If you search for on MuseScore.com, gratis, and then fourth, that'll be enough, because there's always going to be these two accounts, Fourscore and More, Open Music Theory. These are the two accounts where all the Fuchs exercises have been completed and updated, and they're really run by the same people. They just have two different accounts for whatever reason that makes sense to them. I've been using the Fourscore and More one, so I'm going to use this one here, and we're going to see, does he do the G on top? Oh, he didn't do it. So Fuchs didn't tackle that particular exercise. So we don't get to see how Fuchs would have handled that particular case. But that's my call. So I'm going to keep going, because I mentioned there was something else I heard. Now, let's play this game a little bit more. If I did go to an A here, then the cantus firmus moves down to a B, which compels me to again move by step. And since I just did one of those backwards suspensions, the retardation, where the resolution is up, it makes me want to come back down. That's probably how I would do that. Yeah, either of those could be okay, but then I have an octave, right? But either way, I would then be able to leap. After this, the cantus firmus comes in with the G, and now I can leap and be back where she was, leaping back up to the C, and continue from there. All right, so this is a parallel fifth, right? E. So starting on this measure here, the E against A is a fifth, so it's a 5 becoming 6, which is fine, but then the cantus firmus moves to a D, which creates another fifth, which then becomes a sixth. So they're both individually resolved okay, but it does give you this at the beginning of the bar. So it's a thing. Resolving to a sixth isn't enough, have to move in step direction. Yeah, if it is a suspension, if it's a dissonance, it's got to move by step. It just pretty much accept that. Dissonance has got to move by step. The exception is, if you want to look at it that way, is cases like when I talked about that thing that Kevin did earlier, leaping up to that dissonance. And I said, well, you can leap up to a dissonance. Well, you could also leap down from a dissonance. Now, in this case, this case, we would really say that we were going from D to C. We just arpeggiated to delay it. You'll see Bach do that a lot, arpeggiating into a dissonance and arpeggiating out of that dissonance, but either way, ultimately a stepwise resolution. So yeah, definitely focus on stepwise resolution of dissonances, virtually all the time. There is a thing called an escape tone that you'll see occasionally, but that's more of an ornament than anything else. So there was my parallel fifths. I feel like the one I heard was later and might have been octaves. Let me try that again. Yeah, so here we have C to D. Now, the question is, does she get away with it? And I think the answer might be a little bit more yes here. G, octave, and there's that octave. So here we're going from a C against C at the beginning of a measure to a D against D at the end of the next measure. And they're interrupted by some contrary motion, right? We're going up into that D and down in, the top staff is going up from C to D, the bottom staff is going down from E to D. That contrary motion helps disguise whatever parallel octave existed. So the fact that they were from different metric positions, first beat of one measure to second beat of the next, or first half of one measure to third to second half of the next measure, and we're interrupted by contrary motion, really helps that be fine. Before is the E octave. Oh yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, you're right, sorry, and that's part of why I think I noticed it more than I did. So yeah, E, C, C. That one is maybe more noticeable, and I think that's what I actually heard, and I think she would have gotten away with the D one totally if I hadn't already heard the E one and didn't realize I heard it because I saw the D one. I think that's really what happened. So let's listen to that again, starting from around here. I'm messing this up rhythmically. Let me try that again, starting here. G, D. Yeah, so that E to E is basically first beat of measure to first beat of measure. E, the two E's are at the beginning of the measure, the two C's are at the beginning of the measure. And I think to the extent the D1 was noticeable at all, it was only because it was following that other one. But here's this other interesting fact. There is a sense in which that follow the leader arpeggiation kind of feels a little bit idiomatic of something. I'm not saying go out of your way to do this, but I am saying that something about what I hear, not the G didn't get an octave against it, but I'm just for the sake of argument, I really feel like I'm hearing this. I feel like I'm hearing an arpeggiation of a C chord more than I'm hearing parallel octaves, if that makes sense, because of the way that E harmonizes against the C when it happens. The E at the top harmonizes against that C. So I feel like those little bits of harmony help disguise it a little bit or turn it into something else. So it's one of those ones, again, where you need to listen and decide for yourself based on what you're doing with the piece. Does that work for you or not? So yeah, it's definitely trickier to do the counterpoint below because it can be trickier, I should say, especially if you're trying to do this. With the fourth species stuff is trickier to deal with because we're so, well, I don't know. I'm used to these 4-3 suspensions. Those 4-3 suspensions follow very naturally, as do the 7 to 6 suspensions. 7 to 6 and 4-3 suspensions with the counterpoint above are just really natural, happen all the time. So the suspensions that we're going to get below are going to be these 2-1 suspensions. She has a really nice one right here, right? So starting from this, A to E, G to D, there's a 2 to 3 suspension. And it's really lovely, extremely effective there. That 2-3 suspension. And again, if I try to play this passage lining up the notes, I'm going to have those parallel fifths. But then, whoops. Now, what am I doing? It's this to that, right? So that's what's going on. I played it in the wrong order because I'm still thinking upside down. It's the offset note is the G. That's the one that's consonant against the E. And then D against A. So we have that characteristic downward descending motion in the counterpoint, which then tells us if we offset it, we're going to get nice things. That is just going to work. And so I don't know if she wrote this by first starting to do a first species one and then offsetting it, or if it was more just working left to right on it. But in any case, it has that characteristic that you kind of know is going to work and works well. So I said I wanted to spend some time on each of the first, second, third, fourth species. There's a couple other like kind of particular ones I wanted to jump over at, and Bob, where's Bob's thing? Yeah. So I haven't had a chance to look at this because he just posted it last night, and I haven't had a chance to look, but I love what I think he's doing here, and so I'm going to comment on it, and we'll check it out together here. So I talked about in the third species lesson about the cambiata feature, also referred to as changing tones, and then there's another term of double neighbor tone, which is very related, and Bob has this nailed when he says there's various ways the term is used. So don't get too hung up on technical definitions of the thing, because you will find different people define the thing or give rules for using them. Yeah, so rather than get too hung up on the specifics, I'm going to talk about the more general thing, and then we'll let Bob elaborate on this here. I don't know if you're here, Bob, but the basic idea of the Cambiata feature is of Cambiata figure is going to be contrary motion resolution into a single place. So his version here has this in third species counterpoint, 4 against 1. And let me just go ahead and get that up in another window so it can be a little bigger. This D is dissonant against the E, and it's not resolving by step, but it kind of is, right? So this is the beginning of that thing I was talking about earlier of arpeggiating. This is basically the beginning of that exact figure. This is doing it just a little bit. Right? This is E minor 7 going to A minor, kind of, right? So this is the beginnings of that idea, that 7th resolving to the 6th, but being interrupted by a leap of a 3rd. So there's that. Here's another example. And this version here, I need more context to understand this, because having that 4th at the end of that bar, well, that can't be the end of the whole thing, right? There's got to be a resolution of that as well. So that E itself had better resolve by step to something in the next measure. So maybe it goes like that. That dissonant 4th going up a step there. That would make total sense there. And so that's not so much sounding like we're arpeggiating anything. Now it's more like the E is itself a passing tone, getting me from the D to the ultimate resolution, which is an F in the next measure. So I would need to see it. So Sora, I marked everything, and let me get to yours in a moment, since you've been so lovely in the comments here. But I'm going to just talk about this example a little bit more. So he's got all these examples that he's gone through. So yeah, this is, here's that exact example here. I imagine it going there, but it really, in his version, goes to a D there, but it's the same melody. And yeah, so these are interesting little figures, and I tend to not obsess too much about them. And when I was talking about my construction of third species counterpoint, I was really thinking about how could I get from this G to that F. And, I was looking at, I looked at all sorts of different figures of how can you get from here to here in 4 notes or less, right? So if you do that, you come up with figures like this that you say, hey, that sounds kind of nice, and even though there's like a weird dissonant leap in it somewhere, something about it kind of works, and then someone puts a name on it and calls it, oh, well, we'll call it Cambiata. So I tend to not get hung up on the names. I focus more on where it's going and whether that thing gets me there and whether I like how it got me there. That was the type of figure I did. Up a 3rd as another way of getting to that F, but this is another nice little figure. And it works especially well because that note on beat 3 is consonant, and that helps that figure work nicely. If you ignore the F temporarily here, then that would be fine, right? G, and then leap down to consonants, passing tone into consonants, so that would have been fine. And then the F is just like a little anticipation of the F following. So, right, I'm hearing the F kind of anticipating the F to follow, and then the DE. This is how I can rationalize this and put names to it. But yeah, that rather than learn a bunch of names and memorize the patterns and exactly what goes into it, I tend to think of it that way. But Bob's done this fabulous job of actually breaking this stuff down, so it's not this guesswork that I rely on. So if you're going to really deal with this style and really try to get inside it and really make sure that you're doing things that sound Renaissance-y, then yeah, you want to do you want to pay attention to all these specific patterns and work through it. So I absolutely applaud Bob having done that and encourage you all to take a look at it. So I am now going to flip back over here and find Sora your version here. Right here is a second, third species version. Just got to figure out where it actually went because got a bunch of open windows now. Is this the one here? Nope. Where did it go? Didn't I just open it? Oh, it's just right here. So let's take a look. I'm going to play through a little second species, play through a little first species, and see. So since we haven't done any Phrygian mode, I'm going to check that one. Oh, use an escape tone. Nice. All right, so nice stuff here. And what I'm going to say here is I love that you are labeling your non-chord tone or labeling your non-harmonic tones, your dissonances. And I'm assuming you're well aware that you are doing the things that I said, well, in the Renaissance, they wouldn't do these things, right? Neighbor tones are relatively rare in this context, second species type of context. In Renaissance, become much more common post-Renaissance. But that's fine. Escape tones, this idea of stepping into a dissonance and then leaping out, that's also not so common, especially in second species in Renaissance, but as an ornamental figure in later music is super common. You know, if you think of it that way rhythmically, it's just a little bouncing off point. You're really going ba-dum, but we interrupt it with a ba-um. That is what's called an escape tone, becomes really popular by 1700 or so. Now the appoggiatura here, appoggiaturas are another thing that becomes super, super, super common in the Baroque, but there's something odd about this that I want to unpack. So you're stepping into a dissonance, so in that sense it's not an appoggiatura, and then you're leaping out of it into another dissonance. So this note here, this passage here is the one I'm not so sure about. You have a consonants against consonants. You're stepping into a dissonance that I then expect you to step out of. Either have it be a neighbor, but that wouldn't work so well unless you put some quarter notes in there. So you're stepping into that thing, which makes it not an appoggiatura because an appoggiatura is leaping into. However, your next note is also a dissonance, and you're leaping into that dissonance, but you're leaping from another dissonance. So that you've got two dissonances in a row. One isn't resolved by... You've got two dissonances in a row with a leap between them. That feels out of character whether we're talking Renaissance or Baroque. Now, there might be other contexts in which that's totally in keeping, but I feel like neither Renaissance nor Baroque composers would have gone from dissonance to dissonance directly like that, especially by leap. But here is a perfectly fine, use of a tritone. Again, Renaissance, maybe not putting the tritone on the beat, but Baroque, sure. Now, the thing about the cadence here is if you're going to do these cadences, Phrygian cadences, you really want that D to be sounding against the F. So instead of putting the D against the E, let the D happen against the F. let the E's arrive together. Now, if there's a suspension causing the E to be delayed, that's fine, but I still want to hear the D against the F, because this is the characteristic sound that I'm looking for in Phrygian mode. I want to hear that whole step up and half step down at the same time. Whole step up here, half step down there. So that's what I want to hear. And now I'm just going to do a quick since we haven't done an A1 yet, we're going to check out one of this version here and see if anything else. So you've got some also anticipations and everything. Lovely. Nice. All right, so again, I'm loving what you're doing here in terms of your use of these these dissonances that are outside the context of the usual just passing tone and suspension, maybe an occasional neighbor tone, that you're going out of your way to use anticipations and escape tones and the neighbor tones and the appositura that maybe was happening but maybe wasn't quite right. So yeah, I'm loving it, and I think this one is super effective. These anticipations are, I think you're using them more often than is typical, but they're so effective, and it ties the piece together. So I'm actually really loving those anticipations a lot. So anticipations being, now you're calling this an anticipation here, but of course this one is actually not dissonant at all. But some of yours are, right? Like this measure here. Here, that D against E is dissonant, and once or twice I actually played them like to make it more clear to the ear that this is sort of an ornament going into the next note, and that's typically how these things will often happen, is in a faster context like that, but not always, and when they happen at a slower pace, then they're more prominent and more interesting as a result. So yeah, I love your use of anticipations here. I love your ascending line into that A. That is absolutely the right way to handle this, where if you're going to raise the G sharp, you should also raise the F to F sharp. I didn't really talk about that much, but yes, that is absolutely a thing, because otherwise you have that harmonic minor sound, which isn't Renaissance-y. It is another thing, for sure. It's very Middle Eastern, a lot of other things, but not so Renaissance-y. Yeah, really nice stuff there. And again, with the escape tone, I like how that's functioning there. So yeah, there's some really good stuff in here. So love that you did that. And yeah, that's, what else can I say? I do want to just quickly try to answer this one other question here from Patrick. Is piano duo not the same as piano duet? So yeah, Patrick, you might have to ask that question in the community, post it to the discussion and support stage page. But yeah, duo is the same as duet. But if you are trying to do a two piano thing, there's complications about how that's usually set up, because usually it's set up on separate pages, and no, there's no direct way to do that in MuseScore, but we can certainly look at what you're trying to do and talk about the best way to accomplish it. All right, I've talked a whole lot here about a whole lot of different things, and hopefully you've enjoyed the experience, and let's play some music out of here. So, thanks again, everyone, for all the comments. Oh, and Patrick, sorry, I missed your answer fast, but you'll hear that. Yeah, I'm so happy to see people doing these exercises and having the chance to talk about them, starting real soon, like, within the next couple of days, I'll post a project to work on where it's not just these exercises, but you get to think more about using all of this stuff in context. And I think you'll see how it starts to come together and starts to be like, oh, wow, I'm making some music now. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. So we'll have one more week sticking on these two voice stuff, but getting a little real with it. And then after next week, we'll move on to 3 voices and get more into harmony. So thanks, everyone. See you next time.